So it looks like Sony can listen after all, at least when enough of their community starts a riot, because one of their newest live service Horizon games is apparently being rebooted. According to a recent Bloomberg report, after Guerrilla Games faced a ton of backlash after they announced Horizon Hunters Gathering, combined with the negative feedback they received from the closed-door beta tests, the studio apparently decided to rethink the entire project. And we're not talking about making a few tweaks either. A few anonymous sources inside the company say the team has actually been working on a reboot since June, and apparently the new plan is to remove the live service components entirely and turn it into a much more traditional co-op multiplayer game, with a dedicated story mode and a significantly smaller scope. Which, on the surface, all sounds great, right? But then you get to this next part. Apparently the team is now on the clock and they have until December to impress Sony's executives with their next milestone, or else. And just to add insult to injury, apparently at least some members of the Hunters Gathering team has been reassigned to different projects. So the game is not cancelled, at least not yet, but it's definitely in danger. It definitely sounds like this project could be cancelled later this year unless this team finds a way to make it feel genuinely unique and interesting, without leaning on a battle pass or skins. And I personally am a little bit torn about this whole thing. I mean, on one hand, I'm genuinely happy that both Guerrilla Games and Sony finally listened to reason. We all know that Horizon did not become successful because there are robots and tribes and hunting. It's not Monster Hunter after all, an IP that Capcom spent years perfecting and mastering. Of course, all those elements matter in Horizon, but it's definitely not all of it. People didn't buy millions of copies just because fighting robots looks cool. They bought these games because of all the single-player elements surrounding that. I mean, those previous games had it all. You had a great protagonist, you had an interesting story, you watched the characters evolve, and piece by piece you uncovered what actually happened to this world and why it became the way it is. That's the stuff people connected with. And it's pretty difficult to shove all of that into a battle pass. So making the game smaller, more focused and more story-driven definitely plays to Guerrilla Games' strength, which in my opinion it should have been their direction from the beginning, as I was surprised as anyone when they announced that they're doing a live service title, of all things. And yes, the art style and the mechanics and the character design, they didn't land at all, but I mean, I don't hold it against them. After all, everybody wants to look like Fortnite these days. So we have this game, right? Somebody at Guerrilla Games created a pitch for it and presented it to a group of Sony stakeholders. And somebody, or probably a group of somebodies, looked at it and said, yep, that sounds great. They approved it, they assigned people to it, they spent millions of dollars probably developing it, and apparently did all of that without thinking about either the Horizon audience or the market they were trying to enter. And now it looks like they're just shifting the blame to development team and saying, you know what, you screwed up, so you've got 6 months to figure this thing out, or the project is cancelled and you're out of the job. And that's the part that pisses me off. I mean, what was going through the head of those same executives when they looked at the game before public ever saw it? They watched the footage and they were like, yeah, this looks cool, let's reveal it. Why is that considered normal, but now we have developers who have to work twice as hard because people above them apparently failed to look at the bigger picture? I genuinely thought that after the Concord disaster, Sony would have learned something. But apparently, this live service itch just cannot be satisfied, even after you poured millions upon millions of dollars down the drain. And yeah, I know, I'm just yelling at the clouds at this point. But the amount of IP mismanagement at Sony is just mind-blowing recently. At this point, all I can really hope for is that the people who decided to push this thing forward eventually face some consequences for those decisions, and that the actual development team manages to turn this project around before the clock runs out. And if you think that this whole thing will suddenly make Sony put the attention back on the Horizon Mainline game, well, apparently not. Because in the same Bloomberg report that was covering the Horizon Hunters Gathering disaster, we've got some information about the next Horizon game, and unfortunately the news are not great. Apparently most of Guerrilla Games' resources are currently tied up in two projects. The first is obviously Hunter's Gathering, and then to a smaller degree there is Still Frontiers, which is a separate MMORPG for PC and mobile being developed by NCSoft in collaboration with Guerrilla. But there is a small silver lining here. Apparently a small number of developers has started working on the next mainline game. The problem here is that with the pace that this is going, it's going to be years till we see or hear anything. And that's a shame because from my perspective, it seems like Sony is doing everything but what they should be doing. I mean, every mainline Horizon game demonstrated that there is a huge demand from the audience out there. Sony has literally sales data to prove it. Even if we look at the data from years ago, Horizon series has already passed almost 33 million units sold, and it was back in 2023. So why Sony decided that this was the time to deviate from their course and start exploring other avenues is just beyond me. I understand wanting to expand the franchise. I mean, that part makes complete business sense. You have a valuable IP, so obviously you're going to explore different ways of growing it. But in my humble opinion, they've got their priorities backwards. I think assigning so many people to Hunter's Gathering was a mistake. If I were doing it, I would do it a complete opposite. Take a smaller team, have them make a concept of a live service title, test it, prototype it, verify that the concept actually works, and then once you have evidence that you've made something that people actually want, start assigning more and more people to it. Meanwhile, assign the majority of your resources on the next mainline game, the thing that's already proven itself. And that game can help cover the costs of all these experiments. I mean, do you see Insomniac making any live service experiments right now? Or Naughty Dog? Yeah, I don't either. I mean, sure, there was this whole multiplayer The Last of Us game that got cancelled, but I digress. Maybe I'm not experienced enough in game development and there is some larger logic here that I'm completely missing. But from where I'm sitting, it looks like Sony is delaying their most validated product in this franchise, just so it can fund significantly less proven extension of the IP. But hey, what do I know, right? And after everything we've talked about, let's talk about FromSoftware, as they might be a prime example of how to do experiments without alienating their entire fan base. And I want to talk about them specifically because after the release of Elden Ring Night Rain and the upcoming release of Duskbloods for Switch 2, some people have naturally started wondering whether multiplayer projects are becoming the future of FromSoftware. And apparently they are not. According to a recent interview between IGN and FromSoftware's president, the fact that the company ended up having two multiplayer projects back to back is nothing more than just a pure coincidence. And there wasn't some giant strategic plan behind all of that. According to the president of FromSoftware, the teams responsible for these projects just came up with ideas that didn't make sense in a single player game, but the leadership team thought that they were pretty strong and then just went with them. And that's basically it. And he specifically wanted to reassure players that FromSoftware still has a heavy focus on single player content and absolutely plans to make more single player games in the future. And what's interesting is that this experimental approach seems to be working out significantly better for FromSoftware than it has for Guerrilla Games, for example. Because when you think about it, both companies did pretty similar things. Both made extremely successful AAA single-player games, both decided to explore multiplayer ideas, but one of those projects was effectively dead when the first trailer appeared, while the other sold 2 million copies in a single day. and eventually surpassed 5 million copies sold, and that was a year ago. Now, of course, it's not like Night Rain was perfect, far from it. The game received plenty of criticism when it launched. Players complain about the difficulty, complain about the lack of a two-player mode, and plenty of other things. But I think there is one huge difference between what FromSoftware did and what we've seen from some other companies. FromSoftware never looked like they were making a game in pursuit of some vague mass market audience. All their games, they still feel like FromSoftware. They kept their core style, they kept their core identity, they kept the essence of what people associate their games with. So they did plenty of experiments, but at the same time they did not abandon the reason why people liked them in the first place. All in all, what I think is that companies can and should experiment. I still want Elden Ring 2 or whatever the equivalent ends up being as much as the next person. But FromSoftware is a pretty great example of something I think a lot of publishers are forgetting. Fans will follow you everywhere as long as you keep giving them at least some of what made them fall in love with your games in the first place. And that's probably something a few other companies should learn before they start planning their next big portfolio expansion. Do you remember all these conversations about whether GTA 6 would be a $100 game and how nobody would buy it? Well, apparently all those conclusions were premature, to say the least. Apparently most of the people pre-ordering the game right now aren't buying the cheaper version. They are buying the $100 Ultimate Edition. At least that's what analysts are saying right now. According to the data from Sensor Tower shared by GameIndustry.biz, at least 89% of GTA 6 pre-orders are currently for the $100 Ultimate Edition rather than standard for $80. And apparently the percentage is roughly the same for both Xbox and PlayStation. Of course, none of these numbers are official, but they do line up pretty well with something Take-Two Interactive CEO Strauss Zelnick mentioned a while ago during an interview with CNBC. He essentially said that pre-orders were skewing towards the premium edition, so these numbers aren't completely coming out of nowhere. That said, analysts at Sensor Tower are not expecting this split to stay like this forever. They're expecting that the closer the game gets to release, the more casual customers start pre-ordering it. And as that happens, they're expecting the split between Standard Edition and Ultimate Edition to be roughly 50-50. And then there is another important caveat here. Sensor Tower explicitly pointed out that GTA 6 is extremely difficult to benchmark against conventional video games launches, which is probably a tremendous understatement, because this isn't exactly a normal game. But still, I am both impressed and surprised by what Take-Two and Rockstar have managed to pull off here. Because even though they technically have a cheaper standard edition, they've managed to move almost their entire core audience toward a $100 price point. And from a business perspective, that's actually a very clever, I don't want to say manipulation, but it kind of is. They're basically killing two birds with one stone. Rockstar can publicly maintain that there is still an $80 entry point, and nobody is technically being forced to spend $100. But at the same time, they're extracting something much closer to 100 in gross value from the average customer, at least inside this early pre-order pool. And I think this is a good segue to talk about something bigger. What does it mean for the rest of the industry? I can guarantee you that a lot of studios and publishers are looking at Rockstar right now. They're studying their price, their strategy, and most importantly, the reaction of players. This whole thing is becoming just a huge test case for the industry. If GTA 6 can use its edition structure to effectively raise the price of the game while still advertising a cheaper entry point, and if it can successfully push huge number of players toward the more expensive version, I mean, how long do you think it will be before everybody else starts trying the same thing? Of course, right now this is all just a hypothetical. The game still has to launch first. And it still has to actually prove that $100 is a sustainable mass market price point. But if these numbers are correct and the launch goes smoothly, then I'm more than sure we're going to see more and more games, especially of the AAA variety, following exactly the same footsteps. Now onto something different. 2K opened a new AAA studio, and this studio will be focused on sports games of all things. 2K recently formally revealed Small Axe Studios, a new AAA game development studio based in Vancouver. And technically this isn't a new one. This whole team is apparently evolved from their own internal 2K Sports Lab, which apparently was operating already since 2023. They're just making them into an official studio now. And they want them to take everything that they've learned from games like NBA, WWE, and PGA, build on that foundation, and push things even further. And then you look at who they've put in charge. The leadership team includes people who previously worked on projects like FIFA, Madden, and college football over at EA. So while they're not sharing officially what their next project is, it looks pretty obvious that they're planning to take on EA, at least when it comes to football games. And honestly, that would make sense because there have already been rumors about potential negotiations between FIFA and Take-Two. Ever since FIFA ended its partnership with EA, I'm sure they've been looking for a way back into video games. And 2K would be pretty good and honestly very obvious candidate. But if that ever happens, 2K would need to be very careful here. Because I don't know if you remember, but there was a very specific reason why EA and FIFA split. These two companies could not agree on the licensing fees, which my guess in this instance are pretty substantial. So if FIFA is looking for their next partner, I'm pretty sure they're not just going to accept a smaller slice of a pie, which means that 2K will have a pretty interesting decision to make here. What's worth more, the enormous brand recognition that comes with the FIFA name, or maintaining control and trying to build their own football identity without it? And honestly, I'm not sure what I would choose if I were them. But regardless of where this goes, and if this is actually the case, at least they're trying something new, right? And it's always a good thing to cover a new studio being opened than another studio being closed. And the last thing for today, I wanted to talk about two big giants, Disney and Epic. We have all heard by now that Disney invested $1.5 billion in Epic Games. But when you look at what both companies already have, I think Epic might need this relationship a lot more than Disney does. When it comes to Disney, the company recently came out once again and explained how important video games are for their business. Disney's EVP of Global Games spent a ton of time talking about the stories video games can bring to life, how games are increasingly becoming the first place where their audience discover Disney characters, and how games developed using Disney's IP generated almost $4 billion in profit. And that's only during their last fiscal year. And Epic Games was a pretty big part of that conversation. Disney once again said that its partnership with the creators of Fortnite is incredibly important. And they reiterated that they want to create something extraordinary together. I mean, obviously, after investing $1.5 billion into something, I would probably also expect to make something great. And the whole post sounds amazing. It's completely vague and almost entirely full of empty statements, but I mean, thumbs up for a speechwriter, guys. But the question I keep asking myself is who benefits more from this entire partnership? And I think the answer might be Epic, because even if we completely ignore the ridiculous number of companies Disney owns and all the different businesses it operates in, just look at their video games. Even without Fortnite and all the collaborations happening there, Disney still has its fingers in a ridiculous number of pies. I mean, you've got Marvel rivals, you've got Wolverine, you've got Insomniac's Spider-Man, you've got all the Battlefront games, you've got Star Wars Zero Company that's about to be released, and I can keep going. My point is that all these games, they benefit Disney. Epic, meanwhile, has said multiple times that it's looking for new ways to bring people back into Fortnite. And to me that suggests that the game is slowly shrinking and Epic knows it needs to keep fighting for people's attention. And if you want to keep those people inside Fortnite, one of the easiest ways to reel them back in is with exactly the kind of things Disney can provide. Crossovers, events, famous characters, massive entertainment brands. Especially when all these things happen with a major movie or a show release. All this big transmedia machine is very powerful and it worked wonders for this game in the past. But will it work forever? I honestly doubt that. Of course, these collaborations and crossovers are still profitable, but if the actual gameplay does not meaningfully evolve, eventually adding another famous character is going to produce smaller and smaller results. And I think we've already started to see some of that. What I'm trying to say here is that while I think it is great for Epic that they secured this huge paycheck from Disney, I think they need to also start figuring out how to evolve Fortnite into something else aside from what it already is. Maybe that evolution means that they need to keep evolving the genre, maybe it means to switch into something else. I mean, we all heard that they're cooking up a new extraction shooter with Disney specifically. Whatever it may be, I think Disney will be fine without Epic at the end of the day, but Epic will eventually die down without Disney. But hey, I'm wondering, what do you think? And that's all I have for you guys so far. Let me know in the comments down below what do you think about all these changes around Horizon games, whether you've already pre-ordered GTA, and if you're looking forward to a new chapter in Fortnite. Thank you for making it this far, and with that, Alex is signing off for today. Cheers!